All right, friends. Hey, it's been good being with you today. We started off this day talking about getting upstream, doing the hard work of engineering upstream and setting some structures and systems in place. And we began that conversation with the recognition that there's a few key structures and systems. We talked about mission focus, organizational clarity, deliberate discipleship, and intentional leadership development. We began a conversation about how do we get upstream with our finances, making sure that we're not just reacting to financial crisis or creating more crisis, but to build within the context of the culture of our churches an understanding of how we mobilize our people's resources for the sake of mission. Then we moved towards a conversation about what does it mean to posture ourselves missionally as we think about engaging our local church context and communities in a meaningful, redemptive way. Next, we're going to turn our attention to really leaning into this conversation about organizational clarity. And what I want us to do is I want to invite us to consider the ways in which our church might benefit from becoming increasingly clear about who we are, what we value, what we do, and why we do what we do, so that we can find increasing alignment across the board within our churches. So let me share with you just a little bit about some of the benefits to clarity. One, clarity provides a collective aim. That means that we are all pointing in the same directions. If you've done church work for any given amount of time at all, you will know the challenges that you face when you have disparate groups of people in your churches pointing in different directions, and how that seems to bleed energy. But when we have named clearly who we are, what we're about, and why we do what we do, then it begins to pull everybody into the same direction. The second thing is, it demands consistency. When we talk about organizational clarity, we're talking about setting something in motion that we can stick to for a good deal of time. We have probably all been impressed by the conference or the seminar or the workshop that we thought, man, this is it. This is the thing. This is what I'm going to try, until we tried the next thing. All of them good intentioned. All of them felt important at the time. Most of them leaving our people confused because it's the next thing that we were trying and they weren't sure how long that thing was going to last. So clarity demands consistency. It ensures alignment, and this was huge. Vision, mission, values, behaviors, stories, metrics, successes, and we're going to touch on these a little bit here today, but I want to say this to us. There was this big push, 90s, early 2000s, every church needed a mission statement, a vision statement, and they needed, and what ultimately that translated into is a lot of great banner work, okay? I mean, let's face it, we kept banner shops in business for a long time because we were always coming up with a new mission statement and new values, and we'd post them and we'd forget about them. That's not what organizational clarity is. Organizational clarity is when you are so clear about those things that it's embedded in the very fabric of who you are as a church, and it informs everything you do as a church. Catalyzes synergy. It marshals the collective energy and intelligence, turning everybody into a contributor and not a competitor. That when we can begin to say to our entire congregational body, you have gifts and grace to contribute to this great and grand drama that's unfolding all around us, this mission that we've been invited to participate in. It pulls all of the best resources from our people. And Pastor Jacob was talking about that earlier. No longer is it us driving the ship consistently. When you're clear about what you do, you have people come up to you and say, hey, can I go do this in my neighborhood? And we're able to empower them and commission them and send them out, rather than feeling like we have to have a committee meeting to organize everything that they need to do. It provides a filter on your decision making. We learn to give a sure no. That means when you know what you do and what you're about, people are going to come to you with, I've got an idea. Not every idea is a bad idea, but not every good idea is your idea. And what happens is when you get crystal clear about who you are organizationally, you're able to say to them, that's a great idea, but that's not for us. Likewise, you're able to give a fully embodied, resounding yes to the things that are aligned with who you are as an organization, as a church. It offers gracious exit ramps. So this is, for some of you, this will feel weird until you start practicing it. When you get super clear about who you are as a church, you define your identity, your values, and behaviors. You're going to have people come to you and say, I don't like that. Now, in the past, you got into this sort of moment where you're like, well, I don't know that I like you, so maybe you should go. Don't play like you haven't thought that. Y'all are holy, but you're not that holy. And so, but it became about personality, right? Like it became about, well, I didn't like that they challenged me, and I don't know why I don't like that. When you have clarity, you can say, I hear you, and I'm sorry, but this is who we are. And so we're a church, we're literally a church for anyone, but we might not be a church for everyone. And that's an important thing to be able to say to someone, in fact, let me help you find a church that's going to meet your needs, because we know crystal clear who we've been called to be in our community, and we've given ourselves to that. And then the last thing, it requires constant stewardship. Leaders provide clarity, leaders reiterate clarity, and leaders repeat clarity. And here's the deal. When you think about clarity, I know it feels redundant. And the last thing you want to do is feel like you're redundant or repetitive. Listen, it takes reinforcing who we are, what we do, and why we do what we do so many times to most of our before they even begin to be able to articulate it themselves. You're not being redundant. You are stewarding clarity well. So what does clarity look like organizationally? I'm going to introduce you to a model that I use when I work with churches, that we use with our Vibrant Church Renewal cohort, and that I've worked with a couple churches on our district and churches more broadly. It's not the framework. It's not the only framework. It's just the framework that I use that makes sense for me, okay? So let's take a look at this. First off, I like to help churches get a sense of vision. And you heard Stan talk about it a little while ago. Discern it, declare it, do it, celebrate it, right? To be able to discern, what do we see? What is God envisioning us to see in our community that we can go and be a part of? But here's what we get a vision, but we then don't ask the culture question, the DNA question. Because here's what we know. If you have a vision with a DNA that do not match each other, it doesn't matter how compelling your vision is, your cultural DNA will sabotage your best efforts to live out that vision. Okay? So please hear me say that. If you have not clarified the culture that you want to become, no matter how compelling your vision is, your culture will ultimately win. It will sabotage your best efforts to live out your vision. So you have to begin to ask the culture question. Too often we get a vision and we move to strategy. What do I need to do next? Culture, this is quote of Peter Drucker, culture eats strategy for breakfast every single day. You have to define your culture. So what makes up culture? Culture is made up first of our values. If vision says this is what I see, and DNA is this is who we want to be, the values are the articulated ways in which we say this is how we're going to live this out. And the value experience, when you're going through this value experience of saying, these are the things that we hold most dear, that are the non-negotiables. These things have to be in place for us to live out our vision. You want to look for, and there's no magic to this, but the sweet spot is somewhere between 4 and 7. Because if you have more than that, you get too many to remember, and if you have too few than that, you're not clear enough. So it's a sweet spot about 4 or 7. And what I like to say is, develop let me just clarify. When I say values, some of you are thinking like prayer is a value. No, prayer is a behavior. Dependency upon God is a value. What's the value that motivates the behavior? Worship's our value. No, worship's your behavior, right? So what is the thing that motivates the action? What motivates the behavior? And when I invite churches into this practice, I ask them to think about what are 4 to 7 sticky ways that you can communicate your values, where your people can get a hold of these things, where it becomes compelling. And you're going to hear some of that in just a few minutes when I sit down and invite some other people to talk about how how that was lived out in their church context, where they developed these sticky values that become repetitive, that people find themselves talking about. It becomes a part of their daily language. That's what values do. Now, here's what's necessary for values to bear the fruit of building culture, is you need behaviors. So we oftentimes think if I give them a compelling set of values, people will think themselves into right act. No, people behave themselves into right action. And here's the key. You can say we're a church that values compassionate care. And yet you can't point to a single behavior in your church that in any way reflects that you value compassionate care. You have to say, if we value this thing, we have certain behaviors and practices that reinforce that value. So if this is the thing we value, this is the thing we do that reinforces that value. And here's what you're going to find. This happens to every church that I work with. You begin to realize we do a whole lot of things that have nothing to do with our values. Remember when I introduced you to sideways energy and convenient distractions at the beginning? This is where sideways energy and convenient distraction settles in. When you have a set of values, but your practices do nothing to reinforce those values, you're actually giving your energy and attention to things that don't move the mission and vision forward for your church. Your practices have to align with your values to reinforce the kind of culture you're building if you're going to move forward towards the vision that God has called you to. And then this is the fun part as pastors and as leaders. We get to collect stories. Stories are ultimately what legitimize and build into us the nature of how our values and behaviors are being lived out and expressed in people's lives. So when I moved to Bridgeway Community Church in Pekin, Illinois, I inherited a church that had a strong culture. Though very few people could articulate all of the values, every story that I heard pointed to one of the values that the church leaders held. Because everything that they did was in alignment. And the things that they celebrated were only about the values that they had. This is where, when you begin to bring alignment, values, behaviors, stories, metrics, the things that we measure, you'll stop celebrating the unnecessary things and only celebrating the things that are consistent with your culture, your values, and your vision. And so we had at the church that I pastored, we had 3 metrics. Gospel saturation, number of people being baptized and entering into our discipleship pathway. Local community transformation, what are the qualitative and quantitative ways our community is different as a result of our presence? And micro multiplication, who are the disciples making disciples and leaders making leaders. So on a Sunday morning, you would never hear me get up on a Sunday morning and say, we had such and such number last Sunday. No one in our church cared, and we as the staff didn't know that number until Wednesday because that wasn't our metric. Our metric was those 3 things. So what we would do on a Sunday morning is say, let me introduce you to the story of this person who just recently gave their lives to Jesus and entered into our discipleship pathway. Let me introduce you to the story of the person who has been meeting at Starbucks with this person for the last year as a lay person and discipling them and growing in Christ. Those are the kinds of stories we would tell because those would reinforce that this is the culture that we believe in. And what we come to realize is it creates a kind of community. Who we are as a collective group of people, where we can ensure that we're on track with one another. And it becomes clear and infectious and powerful. And as people enter into it, they feel it. So we had a very clear culture at the church that I pastored, and we worked on that clarity. And it was so funny. We believed, and I'll introduce you to some language just real quick here, but we were a church of misfits. The community labeled us that, so we just owned it. We just kind of said, okay, we're the church for misfits, which meant that we believed in redemption. People could be radically transformed and saved and begin to become contributors to the mission. We had a guy who was singing on our praise team who was that guy in the community. He had a long history of a lot of behavior that were inconsistent with Jesus until he met Jesus. And then Jesus radically transformed his life. So I get a call from a guy one day, and he says, hey, I was at your church on Sunday, and I would love to meet you for coffee. And I'm always a little bit like, oh, okay, we'll see how this goes. So I met him for coffee, and he did the whole, like, Christianese nicety thing on the front end. I still haven't been Christian long enough to appreciate that too much. It's like, get to business. Like, what are you really here for? So once the Christian niceties had gone away, he just said, hey, I've got a problem with the person up front. And I looked at him, I said, you do? Why? And he says, well, I know how he used to live. And then I said, can I say something without it sounding rude? And he goes, maybe. And I said, I don't care. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah, I don't care. He's like, well, how can you say that? And I said, because I know his story. And I know how radically his life has been changed. And I can tell you that as part of our culture that we believe that no one is sidelined from the mission of God forever because of how they used to behave. That they can be transformed and become contributors. And we sat there literally for half an hour having this conversation. And the guy at the end threw up his hand and he goes, doggone it. I said, what? And he goes, I came here to set you right and I found a new church. He said to me later, no one had ever been that clear about what redemption looked like. When we are clear, people make their own decisions about whether they fit or not. So our journey at Bridgeway, and then I'm going to turn it over, was a fun journey. There we go. Was a fun journey. We worked on clarifying things. We said it again and again. We had this thing called 33455, and it's so funny because I'm now doing the mentored ministry through Olivet's grad program for one of my former staff members who's now at his third church since leaving Bridgeway. And he said to me the other day on our call, he goes, I'm so frustrated. And he goes, what? And he goes, because our church doesn't have a 33455. So we had 3 points of mission, 3 metrics we measured, 4 points of culture, 5 things and 5 things we did only, and 5 things part of our leadership culture. That was it. And we stated these things over and over and over again. So we did 5 things and 5 things only. We worshiped, we connected, we did local outreach, kids and teens, and micro-multiplication. That's it. So I'd regularly have people come up to me and say, hey, can we do that? I'm like, is that one of our 5? No, then no. But you can. And I'll empower you to do that. And you won't need a committee, and we'll support you, and we'll encourage you, but we're not doing that. So it gave us a way to be able to give our fully embodied yes and our resolute no, because we knew where we were aligned. We developed hooks and handles that made sense of how we articulated and communicated who we hoped to be. We talked about the least, the last, the lost, the weary, the wounded, the broken, the battered, and the bruised, because that's who we wanted to be a church for. We were in a very, very broken community. Pekin, Illinois is a very broken community, long history, long story there. And so I had gone from a community where my church was sort of in a really good spot to a place where nothing was in a good spot. And so I would regularly have to stand up on Sunday mornings and just sort of remind people that God loves them because they'd been told that there's no good that comes from Pekin, Illinois. And so we developed a language, and it's like one of these things that it just becomes a hook that you just sort of, we called ourselves Hope-timists. We said as Christians, you can't really be a fatalist. That doesn't work. And you can't be an optimist. Optimist is just wishful thinking. And we are sort of realists. We understand the world as it is. So we developed this language. We called ourselves Hope-timists. Those that believe that though the world is not as it should be, that God is busy at work making it as it ought to be, and He's using you to do so. And it's one of those things that landed. It became a clear identifier of who we were as a church. And we branded it, and we had shirts, and we'd go on to the community parades, and we were known as the Hope-timist Church because we wanted to embody a kind of hope in our community. When you get really clear about who you're called to be, it begins to move throughout the whole of who you are. And everybody gets to figure out whether or not they want to fit to be a part of this journey. Now I want to introduce you to 2 of our pastors on the district who've gone through this process in their churches. The first of which is Dr. Mark Coulter. He's going to come and talk to us about how he led the process in the transition from one leadership team to the next, how he led the transition of clarifying again in this new iteration of the Valley's life what this process of clarity was going to look like. And then you're going to hear from Eric Anderson, who's just recently gone through this process at St. Mary's. And can I just tell you, to hear from them talk about the ways in which clarity has been embedded in their congregations or they're embedding it is just inspiring. So Dr. Coulter, if you'll come and share with us a little bit about what's happening at the Valley.
Thank you, sir. I'm just going to click Jeff's slides back and forth, and sit down. Phenomenal stuff. Before I start in, I just want to say, wow, the stories this morning, how awesome is it to be on this district and see missional leaders and outward-facing churches? Can we just give each other a round of applause on that one? That was awesome and so cool. So kudos, everyone, for leading so well. What I really want to do in my time here is not share a bunch of stories about the Valley. God is continuing to do amazing things. I really want to do more of a how-to, like how did we actually do this at our church? And some of the things, hopefully, are immediately translatable. You can maybe just copy and paste. Others, you'll just have to contextualize based on your situation. But the word that I want to keep coming back to, and Jeff mentioned it, is the word alignment. Now, I'm like Stan Tharp. Stan's actually one of my mentors, and so I love participation. So can we all say the word alignment together? Alignment. If that's maybe nothing else you remember, maybe that word alignment sticks with you. When I envision alignment, even though this is not a sport that I'm really into personally, but I envision a NASCAR pit crew. Think about it. In a NASCAR pit crew, when you watch them when it pulls into the pit, do you think people don't know what they're supposed to be doing there? Like, they know, right? I mean, the clarity is off the charts. Like, this person knows they have the right front tire, left front tire, oil change. That's about how far my knowledge of cars go, okay? Right? But the reality is, if one person doesn't know what they're supposed to do in a NASCAR race, like 0.2 of a second is the difference between first place and maybe not even second place, but third or fourth, right? And so I always am thinking through alignment, because clarity is kindness. Clarity is kindness. And so when our staff, if you have a staff, or when your board, which you all have a board, or your people that serve in your ministry or in the congregation, when they know why you exist, which is the mission, and they know where you're going as a church, that's the vision, and they know how you're going to get there, that's the things like strategy and values that I'll talk about in a second, it's game changer. Absolute game changer, because now you're aligned, and like Jeff and others have said today, you're not wasting energy. There's not sideways things. I mean, all of us wake up every day, and it's easy to get sideways energy at a church, right? I mean, it's as a leader, it's really easy to get distracted. I mean, as soon as you check your email, like what you had planned that day can go off course. And sometimes that happens, right? That just is what it is. But the more you and I are aligned as leaders, and our churches are, on where we're going, the less you're going to drift and less you're going to get off course. And so the thing that we started with was this, and I don't say this like spiritually or pastorally, we started and continue this process with prayer and fasting. That's the bedrock of what I'll talk about, mission and vision and values and strategy and all that. And I mean that. That's not, again, flippant. Prayer and fasting were the precursor to this. Prayer and fasting were in the midst of it. Prayer and fasting continue to be and will always be the foundation of what we're doing here. So our process then started with that. A lot of prayer, a lot of fasting of, okay, God, like, who do you want us to be? What we know that we're the vehicle as a church to fulfill God's mission, but what's that look like for us? What are you calling specifically the Valley Church to do and to look like? So after the prayer and fasting, the next step was as simple as this. I felt we needed a definition of a disciple. Like, what is a disciple? What is a follower of Jesus? Now, a lot of these things I tend not to do in a vacuum and then come out of my prayer closet and say, thus saith the Lord. There are a few times, this was actually one of them, where I unilaterally kind of defined this. None of the staff objected to it, and I think you'll see why in just a moment. But I would encourage you with this, that was almost one of the few exceptions. Everything else in our process of getting organizational clarity was done as a team. Now, for us, that was a staff, but if you don't have a staff, that's going to be your board. And, of course, our board was involved in that, too. It could be key leaders in your congregation. identify those. It doesn't have to be 10 of them. It could be just 3, 4, or 5. But if you can get those key influencers, key leaders aligned, and they have a voice, that's the key. If you just come and tell them what you're doing, they may or may not jump on board. But if their voice is involved in the process, like ours were from the very beginning, you don't have to do a lot of arm twisting. I mean, they're telling you, like, oh, this is like, we're stoked about this. They're coming up with the ideas. They're getting excited about those things. We define a disciple at the Valley as this. A disciple is a person who hears and responds in obedience to God's voice. Nothing more, nothing less. A person and every word matters here, it's a person. That could be a child, that could be a teenager, that could be a young adult, a middle-aged adult, and older adult. A person who hears and responds. And at first I didn't have an obedience, but like, you know what? I've heard and responded in disobedience. So we probably should clarify that, okay? In obedience to God's voice. And I'm telling you, everything then, as we look at, as we share the values and mission and vision, our discipleship lifestyle and all that stuff, still comes through that filter. Staff hears it all the time. Are we helping people hear God's voice? Because one of the things we've told our campus pastors, our leaders in ministry have said to our congregation, what if it was just normal at the Valley Church that people, kids, teens, adults, heard and responded in obedience to God's voice? Like, holy cow, right? I mean, like, seriously, right? I mean, that would be, that's kind of normal, right? So I read my Bible, and I know you do too. That's kind of what it should look like. And so that's the foundation for everything. The other thing I did as a leader was this. Again, I did not, other than the definition of disciple, come out and say, this is where we're going. I think this is what we should do. So what I did was I looked at Scripture and I said, okay, where do I know the Lord's calling us as a church? Not just as the Valley, but also as His bride and His design and how the church is the vehicle, like I said before, to fulfill His mission. So what we did in the first gathering that we had, so again, in my case, it was all the staff, I said, we just read Ezekiel 47, verses 1 through 13. And if you're familiar with Ezekiel 47, it's where the vision Ezekiel has. God puts him in the temple, and then the trickle starts out of the temple, and it starts as a water. The water starts as a trickle, and then God places Ezekiel in the river, and it gets what? Ankle deep. And then it gets knee deep. And then it gets way. So I'm just reading this. I'm not saying this is our vision. I'm just saying, staff, leaders, start thinking. What's God saying to you with this? And then it gets waist deep, and then it becomes a raging river. And then what do you know about Ezekiel 47? Wherever the water goes, things that were dead, what? Come back to life. And then it empties into the Dead Sea, which is not like some deep theological thing. It's actually dead, okay? There's nothing living in there. And yet everything in the Dead Sea comes to, and I said, man, what if that's what the Valley Church looked like? Wherever the river flowed. And notice it wasn't going into the temple, it was going out. And notice it didn't start as a raging river. It started as ankle deep, and then it went knee deep, and then it went waist deep, and etc. And then the other passage we looked at was Luke 4, verses 18 and 19. Jeff shared it at the beginning today. It's Jesus' first sermon. I think N.T. Wright calls it the Nazareth Manifesto. It was a prophecy from Isaiah of what his kingdom would look like. And so we shared that. Again, I didn't put any language to that. I didn't say, okay, this is what, but I wanted our staff to understand that the kingdom of God is not Jesus and me. Like, that's not a biblical thing, okay? But salvation is, and we're all going to stand in front of Jesus someday, so that probably should be part of why we exist, to help people go from darkness into light. But it has to be more holistic as I look at Scripture and I look at Jesus' ministry and how the kingdom functioned. That's kind of where I left it. You're like, wow, great. That's phenomenal clarity, Mark, which it's not, okay? It's just painting the broad picture, and it took us into the journey of developing alignment. And so staff and Jeff, and I know you're a busy guy, so I hate to say this out loud, but Jeff is phenomenal at this. So like, he was huge in the process for us of helping walk through this. It's a gift God's given him. And so sorry if I just messed up your calendar, okay? And so then the next step was, well, what's our mission? Why do we exist as a church? Now remember, alignment is not that Mark knows all the answers to the questions. And staff knows what's coming here, so they're prepared. They didn't know I was sharing probably or anything. All right, Taylor, what's our mission at the Valley Church? Okay, we exist to punch holes in the darkness, okay? We exist. There's a lot of darkness in this world, right? Darkness of sin, darkness of addiction, darkness of hunger, darkness of poverty, darkness of homelessness. We exist as a church to punch holes in the darkness. I was speaking at something in the Joplin district back in October, and I said to them, I feel beyond confident that if I, on my phone right now, called any of our staff, any of our board, and frankly, probably most in the congregation, or at least whoever I have in my phone, and put them on speakerphone right now and said, what is the mission of the Valley Church? I would be stunned if they didn't know it. Isn't that cool? I mean, literally, we'll be on the platform on a Sunday, and we'll say, all right, everyone, the mission of the Valley Church is we exist, and they'll say, to punch holes in the, you come 3 weeks, and you know the vision. The mission. You come 3 weeks and now here's the deal, as Jeff said earlier, one of the things we actually have not gotten around to yet is putting it on the wall. We've had it for like 2 years, and I don't know, we've had some different designs, and all of them have been terrible, okay? So we haven't got around to and honestly, I think it's a really cool thing, because we don't have our mission on the wall yet. We don't have our vision on the wall yet. We don't have our values on the wall yet. We have them on shirts and all kinds of other stuff, I guess. Okay, Jaden, repping. But it just oozes out of us. Again, alignment. So leaders, once you start getting the clarity, you have to talk about it all the time. Mark Bain's always told me, probably most of you know Mark Bain. Mark says, if you go 1 week without talking mission and vision, you're going backwards. Right? And he's so right with that. And then our vision as the Valley Church, our vision of the Valley Church, Jaden, go for it. Jaden's an introvert, by the way, but go ahead.
Do whatever it takes that people experience spiritual victory, healing, the poor help, and the marginalized are seen.
All right. Jaden is so silent and quiet and but again, that oozes out of us, the vision of the Valley Church. We will do whatever it takes so that people experience spiritual victory. This comes from Luke 4:18 and 19. Spiritual victory, healing, the poor are helped, and the marginalized are seen. And so like Jeff said, we're in a season now where it's story after story after story of spiritual victory. When we just had 20-some baptisms on Sunday, so you're hearing story after story. Healing, when there's healings that take place, we celebrate those. We share those from the platform. When we help them understand, what does it mean for the poor to be helped? And so was someone shared about, a Christmas offering. So we do a Christmas offering. So when we gave it to a bunch of people in a poor situation. And so we bring clarity to that. We let them know, this is what it means, church, when we say we're helping the poor. Or when we share about different things that are helping the marginalized, we specifically say, this is what it means that we're helping the marginalized. We have 5 values as a church. Ryan, what's one of our values? God speaks, so now what? Jess, what's a value? Laurel? Cindy? And we have one left. Who wants the 5th one? Lindsay? Okay. So, and again, I didn't prep them for this, okay? Now, they might have the cheat sheets up. I don't know, okay? But my point, like Jeff said, here's the deal with this. Those are not just statements. It is something that is the fabric of who we are. So we are a next-gen now church, whatever it takes. And so one of the coolest things with alignment, and I'll talk just for a moment to lead pastors, alignment is not just with the adults in the adult service. That's the easiest thing because that's who we see a lot. I can always fall into that trap of, it's just the adults have to know it, the parents have to know it. The cool thing at the Valley is I guarantee you those 3rd graders know the mission of the Valley. My kids are 12 and 9. They know the mission of our church, and it's just because their dad's the pastor, okay, is we exist to punch holes in the darkness. They do. And they know that they hear in teens, they hear in kids ministry that we are a Next Gen Now church. And so then they see that when they're in 4th and 5th grade and they're serving in the elementary. They're not just consuming, but they're serving. When teenagers are running, not just pouring coffee, but literally running the coffee bar, that's another example that we're a Next Gen church. The thing that I've discovered is this. So that's the process. I just wanted to kind of do how we walk through this journey. It started with prayer and fasting. And then we had to bring clarity on I used to be a teacher, used to be a high school science teacher, and I had a student of mine, her dad was a high-level executive at Hewlett-Packard at HP. The guy was brilliant. Weird as get all, but brilliant. And he used to always make this statement when it came to organizational clarity. He said, you have to know who you want to be when you grow up. You have to know who you want to be when you grow up. And so what we did was, as walking through with our team of, okay, here's the broad strokes of where we're going. It's Ezekiel 47, and it's Luke 4, 18 and 19. And here's what it means to be a disciple. And then everyone got a voice in the process, the leader, the staff in this case, got a voice in the process of bringing clarity to then why we exist. So here's the deal. I think, and it was in Jeff's slide, that's why I'm like, I should just keep playing these as I'm talking, because you and I, we cannot figure out what we call it a discipleship lifestyle. It's just a personal thing. Like, I don't look at discipleship as a program. I even not as keen personally. This is just me, so that doesn't mean I'm right. But I prefer like lifestyle even versus pathway, because I'm like everyone. I don't think the discipleship's linear, and I think everyone's at a different part of their journey. And so for us, we said, we need to know where we're going. We need to know our mission. We need to know our vision. We need to know our values before we design our discipleship lifestyle. And so if you're at the Valley Church for any period of time, you're going to know that the language we use for discipleship, staff, what is it, 2 words? For discipleship in general, you're taking a next step, okay? You have our first steps, and we have 4 first steps, and I'm not going to call them for this. They know it, though, okay? We have 4 first steps: church online, connect card, connect event, community event, and we have 8 next steps. And we designed the next steps. When I look at people and say one of the next steps is baptism, one of the next steps is child dedication, when I say one of the next steps is a connect event, one of the next steps is our journey, our valley communities, or the journey one-on-one study, I say, what's the next step God has for you? Because everything filters back to a disciple is what? Someone who hears and responds in obedience to God's voice. So as you're processing this as leaders, whether you're the lead pastor, whether you're leading a ministry, I would encourage you, if you have a staff, you get together and revisit this. Maybe you haven't done it for a long time. Maybe you've done it a few years ago. Maybe you've never done it. Because when we as a church get clarity, and when we get alignment, look out. Everything Jeff said is true. Hey, every week someone comes to me or one of the staff with a good idea. Very seldom do we get like a sinful idea. No, right? We don't, right? But you get these ideas from people, or they want to start this minute or this program, and we're like, and in some cases it does align, in a lot of cases, frankly, it doesn't. And he's right. When you develop clarity of who you are, and when you know that you're aligned, not everyone's going to align with that. It just is what it is. And some will deselect, and that's always unfortunate. But the clarity that comes with that and the alignment that comes with that, you don't get distracted. You don't get off mission. You don't get off vision. Now, I want to leave you with this. I don't know if it's encouraging or not, but I think it is. This took us 2 years. It took us 2 years. Now, it wasn't like we shut down Sundays. It wasn't like we stopped ministries or stopped hiring staff or whatever. But what it allowed us to do was we just kept at it. We kept at it. We kept at it. You know, right now we're looking at, I think, 4 full-time positions we're looking to hire. And one of the coolest things I see when a campus pastor, whoever passes a resume on to me, You know what they put on there, the candidate who's looking? We saw on the website, this happens almost every time. We saw on the website or on the job description that your mission was to punch holes in the darkness. And we saw that your vision, I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating, they could fact check me. And we saw that your vision is we'll do whatever it takes so people experience spiritual victory and healing and the poor, help the marginalized. And that appeals to us. No joke. What it helps is the staff, if you have staff or board or whatever, it helps to decide if they're the right ones or if that's maybe not a good fit for them where they are. And it also then brings into your church and into your leadership those who align. Because like Jeff said, then it creates culture. Lead pastors, one thing I've learned, you don't get to delegate culture. Others, you can empower staff, you can empower the board, you can empower lay leaders to carry that culture, but you decide the culture. And like for us, we're unashamed. We will be an outward-facing church. We will not apologize to help the poor and to see the marginalized. Not going to happen. And if that's not where you feel, if that's not what you're passionate about, that's not what you want in a church, that's okay. It's probably just not going to be a good fit for you. So I'm going to leave you with this. Take the time. Take the time. Keep praying over it. Keep fasting over it. Start somewhere. Don't come out of your prayer closet with the mission. Don't come out of your prayer closet with the vision. Paint the broad picture as God, that's what God started showing me. He started showing me Ezekiel 47. He started showing me Luke 4, and then all the things, especially in missional theology I'd read over the years, and I brought some overarching clarity. And then let your leaders, seriously, let your leaders help shape it. You guide it. You kind of set the guardrails. Sometimes you got to bring it back in the guardrails. But then whether it's your board, whether it's key lay leaders, and I mean this with deepest sincerity, let them help shape it. You'll feel a little nervous about that. I'm like, what happens if they come back and say, we want to be an inward-facing church? We don't want to reach anyone who doesn't know Jesus. And I mean, that was a little exaggeration, but I definitely had some concerns of like, oh my gosh, like, what if the values come back and there's nothing about next gen, which I'm beyond, like, either I'm going to have to, like, get a whole new staff, or I guess I'm going to have to leave, right? You know, if you have the right team, and it's not going to be everyone necessarily, but if you have the right board, if you have the right staff, if you have the right key lay leaders, they'll get you there. And that's why when I celebrate those things, it's because of this team in here. They came up with it. I just helped steer it, and now they own it. That's what I want to leave you with. They own it. And when they own it, oh boy, look out. Because using our language, you're going to punch some holes in the darkness. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was awesome. That was great. Well, and this you'll feel the consistency with this across the board. So we started Vibrant Church Renewal cohorts a little over a year ago, taking a series of churches through this very process. And one of the churches that entered into this process with us was St. Mary's Naz, and we all know Eric and Kelly. They're such vital parts of our district. And the ways in which this church has engaged this process and the clarity that they're right in the midst of this process. So you've heard a church that has gone through this 2-year process to arrive at this clarity. Now you're going to hear from a church that is right now in this process of bringing that clarity and the impact that has had on them. So I want to invite Pastor Eric to come, and he's going to share a little bit about what this journey has looked like for them and the ways in which it's already starting to bear some really cool fruit.
Thank you for the applause. I appreciate it. But Mark got to be Dr. Mark Coulter. I want you to call me Father Eric. And I want you to look at the person next to you and say, he is so special. Don't you believe it? I hope this works. I don't want to break extra stuff. All right. I don't know, was it Stan that put on a timer? Did he put a timer on? You ever seen a pastor put a timer on? Never follows it. I'm not going to follow it either. Well, I wanted to give you a little bit of a different taste of what we're going through at our church. And by the way, my name is Eric Anderson. I am better known as Kelly Anderson's husband, but I'm also the pastor of the St. Mary's Nazarene right here in town. I'm grateful to be in a room like this. I'm grateful to be in a room like this because it's a safe space, I believe, to some extent. A room full of people that understand joy. We understand the weight of ministry. And we understand sometimes the quiet loneliness of ministry too. But about the Vibrant Church cohort, for us, I need to take you on my journey first. Is that okay? Like I'm asking you. But that's okay. I'm going to do it anyways. And about my path in life, and it's part of this planning process. See, I grew up with 5 kids in our family, and we moved a lot. I was born in Portland, Maine, where it's probably warmer there than it is here right now. We lived in Massachusetts, Tennessee, Georgia, Ohio, Cleveland area. My dad had worked for UPS for several years. He was an industrial engineer, and everywhere we went, he built one of their hubs. We kept moving and moving and moving. And all my life, even through all of that, I had always been part of the church. We were always in the church in everything we did. And I remember in Nashville, Tennessee, right down the street from Trevecca Nazarene University on Murfreesboro Road, the Trinity Church of the Nazarene. I was an 8-year-old boy, and I decided to go to the altar because David and Dana Blue, anybody remember them? All the old people? You're not old. All the old people, David and Dana Blue, song evangelists, they got up there and they were singing this song. Jesus got a hold of my life and he won't let me go. Jesus came into my life, he came into my soul. I used to be oh so sad, but now I'm just free and glad, because Jesus got a hold of my life and he won't let me go. Man, I went down to that altar as fast as I could. And once I got saved, I ran back to every 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old, and I grabbed them and said, you got to go know Jesus. You got to try to bring them up there. I walked down, and that was every bit of it. I got back to my seat, and I learned pretty quick that Jesus and the passion in my life, even at that moment, was real. And from that moment and everything, that was what shaped my faith. Not perfectly, but with purpose. I went to Mount Vernon Nazarene College. I graduated, none of your business. In the beginning, 1984, and I began serving in ministry. And like many of you, that's where my calling began. But it's also where the complexities of life began too. See, soon into my ministry, I was in Huntsville, Alabama. Life took a turn. My marriage fell apart. I was bruised and battered, but not beaten. But that's also one of my stains. And here's where everything turned. I want to talk to the pastors and the leaders here today. Is every reflection of my life traces back to that moment when I was 8 years old, when Jesus got a hold of my life and he promised he would not let me go, and he never has. I stepped away from full-time ministry for a season. I regrouped, and I was at UPS, and no, I don't know where your package is. I have retired from that 28 years. I was a national sales rep, and I told the Lord I wanted to be in management, but the one thing I did not want to do was be in sales. And you know, you don't tell the Lord what to do, and that's where he put me for 25 years. 2017, I retired. That job was something that put me in a place where I could still do ministry, but wasn't in ministry as a paid position. But along that way, I learned this very truth, that patience is a virtue, but it's certainly not a rest area. And God was still writing my story. So that goes back to the VBR. We call it the VBR. That I was approached by this VBR cohort. And I thought it was very interesting, yet I didn't think it was who I was. As a matter of fact, when I was on the phone with either Jeff or Andy, and they were asking me about it, I looked over at Kelly and I said, it's a year long. I didn't want to go a year long. I didn't want to do a month long. That was too much for me. And I said no in my mind. But then my wife got a hold of me. That was part of my career. I know I understood it. And I've been in meetings. Jeff, we talk about this. I've been in meetings. I've done strategies. I've done initiatives. I've done all that stuff. And I didn't want to do it then. I didn't think that's what church was all about. I was reluctant. So I accepted the challenge, along with the support of our team gathering, that we needed to not only learn about ourselves, but we needed to learn about who we were as a people and as a church. I think we lost that. And how did the community, to your point, how did the community see us? And how did they know us? We found that part very difficult and healing at the same time. Yes, I believe that vibrancy in the church has probably been lost in some ways. But there is a movement that I believe that's happening, and I don't want to miss that, Mike, especially at my age, When you said 60 earlier, I thought that was funny. You sound like the lady from Saturday Night Live. I'm 60. But I feel like it too. I feel like sometimes I don't want to miss these things. I know I'm getting older, and I know I'm probably one of the older people in this room. But see, at the time I was only 2 years at the church at the time, and I was still getting to know people. I was still trying to create changes. And a pastor friend of mine says, as long as you got change in your pocket, you can still make changes. But life had enough on its own, and I didn't want to add something else to it, another pile. We had done cohorts and exponentials and all that. Kept adding to it. I've been part of the community, activities, ministry association, the chaplaincy, agape board, on and on. I kept piling on, and then they called and said, you want to be part of the cohort? One more thing, and I've only been in there 2 years, and each week as we would sit down as a team, I don't think I was a part of that meeting at the beginning. I thought I just said, Kelly and you guys talk about it. I'm going to sit back and listen. Then I started to figure out as we started to talk and figure out maybe who we were, where the hurt was, and where the struggle was. And the one thing about our church is if we don't know the purpose and the plan, then we'll never understand the real goal of our church. So we have spent the last 3 years now at this church, I've been here 3 years, fixing things, correcting things, painting things, tearing down walls, doing this new carpet, doing that, and trying to get the ministry current. Is that a fair way to say it? Then I'll let the Lord take care of the rest. It was that realization that has started to shape everything we now do as a church. I'm so glad that I convinced Kelly and them to do this program. And I'm sorry. We have created a culture and an atmosphere. To Jeff's point, we have created a culture of language. It's in our sermons. It's in our step groups. Step means stories that encourage people. To make it not about what we are, but who we are. What is our purpose? What is our DNA? What is our culture? It had to change. That rolls over into our leadership, into our people, into our community, and that's it. I want people to see that in us. Because what I learned personally as we began to see this corporately is that people have stains in churches. Grace begins when redeem those stains into stories, and discipleship happens when people take steps of the right path and the right pipeline, and that's when not when they attend more, but when they find out they are loved and accepted. So that's when this was born. You might see it up there. We are a church of stains, stories, and step. I don't have to go to each of our staff. I don't have as many staff as you do, Mark, but I can look at our staff and they know that's part of who we are. It's not a slogan, it's not a branding, but it's a discipleship pipeline for a greater purpose. And here's what we say, and here's what we've learned as a church through this again and again. Stains are where grace begins, and stories are how redemption is shared, and steps are how obedience is lived out. So in that framework, people now start to understand. They start to remember, and in the words of Jeff Stark, they repeat sticky stuff. We are a church of stains, stories, and steps. They do that all week. The tagline that we had at this church for a long time was, be a part of something special. I'll be honest with you. When we put that up there, I didn't know what it meant. It just sounded good, and it painted on well. I don't know. We be a part of something special. We began to talk about what are we special about? What's so special about me and you? Are we really special? On each month, we began to explore the good, the bad, and the ugly stuff. And through the process as a team, we have discovered or uncovered what our missions, our visions, and our values. And to Jeff's point, we're still figuring this out. This is still a process. But we've come up with some things, and our mission is we exist to meet people in their mess. You can stop there and be done. Our vision is we will love you through your stains so we can hear your stories of redemption and walk the next step together. And then our values are, of course, that line. We're a church of stains, stories, and steps. Stains, because everyone has stains. And the funny thing was when we were sitting in one of our meetings, our fire chief always wears a white shirt. And he had a mustard stain on his shirt that they couldn't get out. And that was one of the conversations. That's one of those things that you can't change. I do all that I can to get that out. We all have stains. And it's all messy sometimes, but grace over judgment. Our stories, because everyone's journey matters, and we are better than Cheers. Not only does everybody know your name, but they know your story. In a small town, that's even more so. Because we all have those mustard stains. And then our steps are one thing that everyone knows about St. Mary's Naz is that we have a lot of steps. Anybody ever been to St. Mary's Naz? We have a lot of steps, way too many. Kelly always kids around about what happened if the church ever burns down, they know who they're going to call, and that's Kelly. But we're across from the fire department. But we embrace that. We don't take that separately. We embrace that we have steps because we are on a journey and everyone is on a different step of faith. So you'll continue to meet and discover. That's what we'll do over these next couple of months. We will continue to do that, and we'll move forward in the steps we're supposed to take. The one thing that I love that's happened through this whole process, and it wasn't supposed to be, is staffing. You know, I love, if you know me, I am OCD. Anybody know what that means? Have you ever raked leaves? Only the OCD people are going, I know what you mean. Because I have to get every single leaf. That's not that funny. But if I go, I have to get every leaf. I will rake them all, and I have to go back and get the one that decided to fall. But I found out for me that I can't do this thing alone, and I can't make it all pretty and make it all work out. So what's happened over time is we have Carrie McLean. She's now our children's director. She's over there. Then we have brought on Pastor Tim Mebbs as our steps, groups, and connection pastor, and Shelly's part of that. Is she here? Shelly's back there. And this summer, we will be bringing on Sam Haley and Grace Cadell as our interim summer people. Praise the Lord. Amen. That's part of it. And along with our discovery thus far, we are developing, this is a new thing we just created, and it's in the beginning process, is our DLP program. We, as we remodel our lower foyer, because I am insistent on getting rid of the brick at our church, but we have started a new process, and it's called the Discipleship Leadership Pipeline. Is it up there? Discipleship Leadership Pipeline. And this is something to help our church clarify leadership, coaching leaders, and walk people patiently through the grace and the growth and the obedience. So this is our discipleship pipeline, and it is part of a step of faith, and in that, we will start to uncover and discover how to know Jesus, how to grow in your faith, how to serve others, and go and make disciples. The greatest thing about this for me, and I'm kidding when I say I'm older. I'm getting older, 65 years old now. The only reason I look younger than I am is because my wife's much younger. That's the way to do it. But I don't want to miss seeing anybody make a decision to come to Jesus. And I feel like sometimes we're doing that because Jesus got a hold of my life, and he never let me go. Thank you.
Oh, it's been such a delight to walk with St. Mary's Naz and to see their transformation. But several of the churches that have been a part of our Vibrant Church Renewal cohort and the discoveries that they're making along the way. We'll be putting out more information as time goes on about when we're going to be offering more of those Vibrant Church Renewal cohorts and letting you know what that's going to look like. But that information will be coming out soon. But this is kind of where we're going through some of this work with some of our churches. All right, I want to take 5 minutes. We've got one more section to look through. And so let's take 5 minutes, grab some drink, stand up, stretch your legs, and then let's be right back here in 5 minutes.